Welcome back to Rerouted, where we explore unique career paths to give you the tools you need to create the life you want. On today's episode, I talk with Emily Lawson-Bulten, who is about to finish her PhD under former guest Dr. Ann Perry Whitmer. We talk about Emily's early career as a civil engineer, to how she got to starting her PhD, becoming a well-rounded professional in her field, and dealing with what it means to be the right kind of engineer. Later in the episode, Emily looks forward to what is next as she looks to graduate from her PhD program in May. Let's hop into the episode. Emily, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Great to be here. Happy to be here.
I want to get started. I just want to ask you, on the surface level, what do you do right now?
So currently I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So how I explain to my 7-year-old niece when she asks why I am still in school is because my job is currently school. So I'm completing up my research, hopefully this year. And so that's the majority of what I do is around my research. I, as well, TA, am a teaching assistant. So yeah.
All right. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your research later because I personally think it's very interesting and I think other people will as well. So, can we start off? Can you tell me a little bit about your undergrad experience?
Yeah, so for undergrad, I went to a small private university in Michigan called Calvin University. And there I got my BSc in civil environmental engineering as well as international development studies. And compared to a place like Illinois, it was quite a different experience because we had 4,000 students total, about just over 100 engineers, I think 120. And in the civil area, there were 14 of us that come junior and senior year took most of our classes together. So quite different. I personally really loved it. I got quite close with my professors there and, could still name the 14 people I went to college with. So, as well as I got this really great experience to be a part of the start of the Clean Water Institute there at Calvin University. So, I was able to do research through that and travel a decent amount working on different water systems internationally, partially because it was such a small university and I was able to be a part of so many things.
All right. Can you tell me a little bit more about those travel opportunities that you got?
Yeah. So my first one was when I was a freshman to Kenya. So I was a part of this thing called the John Perkins Leadership Institute, Servant Leadership Institute, which was for first generation college students, but focused around the life of John M. Perkins, who was a civil rights activist and one of the founding members of the Christian Community Development Association. So it was really focused on community development with a Christian kind of theology put into that. And so because I was a part of that, I took what my school had this thing called interim. So in between the fall and spring semester, the month of January, you could take just one class for interim. And I took the freshman class during the fall semester as a part of the Perkins program, which meant that I didn't have a class to take in my freshman year. And so there was a group of half engineer, half going under a engineering professor, half going under a geography professor, headed to Kenya. I grew up in an Ethiopian immigrant church, so I was rearing to go. And the geography professor, his name was Jonathan Bascom, he saw my energy and was like, I guess you will not be denied. And I was really privileged to be able to go on that first trip to Kenya. And that one was really interesting as well, because even though I was an engineer and there was so much engineering on it, I actually went as a part of the social sciences geography group under Dr. Bascom. And so I was exposed to all the engineering items, but was focused on the social sciences items while we were there.
What were some of the takeaways for you through that trip? What were some things? Were there any moments on that trip that were like aha moments? Was there anything that kind of really inspired what you want to do in the future? Because now a lot of what you do is about clean water and water equity. So was there any parts of that trip that kind of inspired you to do what you're doing now?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely cared about water before that. I grew up in
Mm,
Colorado where it's a really water scarce area. People are kind of flabbergasted when I make the comment that growing up we weren't allowed legally a rain barrel because the water that fell on our ground wasn't ours, right?
yeah.
So I already cared about water, but that situation really helped me kind of call into question at first engineering and then really cement a lot of the things I cared about. So, a significant amount of the trip we spent with the Samburu tribe in the northern part of Kenya. We were in a really remote area. I mean, the car we took spent multiple hours not on roads, just on dirt land. Or maybe they were dirt roads and I just couldn't tell at that point.
Fair.
It spent a significant amount of time on this, so we were quite remote, and the Samburu tribe is a semi-nomadic tribe, and so one of the first things that kind of struck me was they were actually only in this situation of water scarcity because they were forced to be less semi-nomadic.
Hmm.
Traditionally, they would have grazed their livestock and traveled them around towards water sources. And, we can go into the history of colonization, right?
Yeah.
But a part of that included kind of having tribes be more cemented in a place. And so we were at a small tribe that actually had a borehole, but it wasn't working. And it hadn't been working for 2 years. And what struck me about that was, again, as an engineer, I would have seen this village as taken care of, right? They have a
Mm,
borehole. They're good.
yeah.
They're connected to water. But for 2 years, it hadn't worked because there was a screw loose. And so I first started thinking about I think that's when, as an engineer, I started thinking about maintenance and long
Mm,
term. I think that's something that as engineers, when we're being trained, we actually don't often think about. We think so much about the design that we don't consider what maintenance looks like. And then because I was with the social sciences group, I was privileged enough to go on a water walk with a community member. I mean, we we only went to a shorter water source that was about 2 kilometers, where in the really dry seasons, they would be walking 3 to 5 kilometers one way to get to their water source. They talked about how they would save their donkeys for the really dry seasons to go get water. But, we would joke about how I was ready to get married because I could carry 10 gallons on my back and 5 gallons in each hand. So because I made the minimum 15-gallon mark, I could be married. Um, and I mean, it was so much work and it took the entire morning.
yeah.
And I think that was kind of the other reason that I was more cemented into caring about water, and water work and water equity because of experiencing that water walk with her and being in this village that, they were so welcoming, they were so loving, and we were able to fix the borehole. But the thing is, it's going to break again, right? And we
Yeah.
left and there was no long-term solution put in place. And so it's kind of this acknowledgement now that I don't know what's happening there. And I don't know if they have water there or not. And I feel like as an engineer, these are things that we should know, the lifespan, right, of our
Yeah.
technologies that we're designing.
What would be your advice for somebody, whether they're an engineer or not, if they're a college student, they have an opportunity or they can get an opportunity to do a trip like this? What would be your advice to them?
I mean, I love it.
Mm,
Some people say that I do too many trips, and actually my sophomore year, in between my sophomore and junior year, I was looking at I traveled to Peru with our our version of Engineers Without Borders. We called it Engineering Unlimited because we were such a small school. So we were working on a project in Peru, and I was trying to decide, should I get an internship in Michigan or should I go and play soccer? Because I was a college soccer player at that time,
sure.
and there was this opportunity to be a part of a summer soccer league that also did soccer camps for kids that we played in Brazil, and then we also came back and played around Chicago and did camps around there. And I remember talking to the professor that I was going to Peru with, trying to decide what to do and kind of get his advice. And he was like, for the rest of your life, you'll have this opportunity to be an engineer. And
Mm,
like, it'll probably be an opportunity to be an engineer in Michigan. But when again will you have the opportunity to go play soccer in Brazil? And I was
mm,
like,
mhm.
say less, right? Like, and I think, when I look at traveling for me, I've really been blessed by the opportunity to be a part of so many people's stories and hear from so many different voices. And I think that that's, even if you're traveling as an engineer, right, doing a semester abroad as some of those are doing, it to me it's an opportunity to start hearing different voices, to hear different perspectives, and it's just so valuable. Uh, yeah, in our society today. And yeah, definitely changed me the travels that I completed while in college.
Okay. Even if you're not an engineer, it's still not just for your engineering knowledge, but for
Yeah.
perspective in general. It doesn't just help as an engineer. Well, all right.
Yeah, that's
Very
fair.
nice.
Although I will say there's something weird about engineers where like from so early I feel like everyone's so serious.
Yeah.
It's really
I
not that serious.
And honestly, I love what you mentioned as well about you have the opportunity to be an engineer for the rest of your life for that internship between sophomore and junior year. I feel like, I was in this position because I'm a junior now. So now I'm looking at the summer between junior and senior year for internships. But talking to people who are in their sophomore year, they really feel that pressure. And I was there last year. We definitely can get quite serious. And I don't know if that's just the Illinois culture, but it is, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That's,
I did
so I
not
appreciate.
do a single industry internship in undergrad.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, what did I even do between my junior and senior year? I did something,
hmm
but then I went and I worked as a research fellow. I actually did research on water policy between my junior
Uh,
and senior year in
okay.
the political sciences department.
Very interesting.
So, I did that between my junior and senior year, and then during my senior year and actually the summer past my senior year, I worked as a research intern, research fellow at the Clean Water Institute. But that meant I got to go to Jordan. So, for me, again, no brainer. And yeah, I graduated without a job, but I found one in less than a month and it was fine.
Yeah,
So,
there
it
you
worked
go.
out.
I am curious also as well, internship or not the research that you did with part of the political science department with clean water. Do you feel like that research experience that wasn't necessarily engineer made you a better water engineer in any way?
Oh, I definitely think that understanding policy makes you a better engineer.
Okay.
To put a poor metaphor on it, again, as a soccer player, when one of my first jobs was as a referee, and a big part of it, my father was like, yeah, you're gonna make at that point I was like 13, so like it was
hmm
decent money for a 13-year-old.
Oh, for sure. Uh-huh.
But the other thing that my father was like, you're gonna understand the game in a different way because you're looking at it from a different perspective. I really got that while working on the policy. The first part of it was actually focused on Christian perspectives towards water. So we did an entire biblical inventory of every time water was referenced in the Bible. And then we started looking at policy because the work was focused around water rights in the Western United States. And so moving, again, I got a theological perspective of water. Then I started getting this policy perspective of water. I started
hmm
understanding international policies and politics around water as a human right and what that means. And I think it does make you a better engineer because you understand the context or the background of what you are designing in.
Okay. I want to extrapolate that out a little bit and say it
Yeah.
seems like that it would make that fair to say, even if you're not a water resources engineer, being able to understand your subject, but from a different angle seems like generally that would be useful. Okay.
Yeah, right?
Very
And then you
interesting.
also know how to interact with people from
Mm,
different perspectives that aren't just on the technical side. You
yeah.
understand the lingo of policymakers, and you might even understand a bit more why things happen the way that they do. Then, when I'm an
Hmm.
engineer and I have to get approval for something, I understand kind of the process of why the approval system is this way, which also means that I understand when I can challenge that process.
Yeah. Yeah. That seems like a bit of a superpower, honestly, to have on an engineering team or any team. And I, not even just
We would go that far.
well, honestly, you were saying that engineers are very, very serious. So quite honestly, even just being able to talk with other people might be a superpower for an engineer. So,
This is true. Yeah. We don't give ourselves enough credit.
we really don't. I completely agree with you. I think that we can be a lot more social than we give ourselves credit
Yeah.
for, 100%. But okay, I feel like we gotta. Well, engineering talk's not gonna stop, but this engineering talk will. I fear. Okay, so you mentioned you graduated, you didn't have a job, but you got one like a month later. Can you tell me a little bit about that first job out of college?
Yeah, for sure. So, my first job out of college was in industry. I was a staff engineer for a small private development firm. I worked on natural gas distribution, environmental inspection. I got to design these fancy things called like horizontal directional drilling when they need to take a pipe like across a big area and they don't want to dig through it. So they essentially make like a giant loop. It was a good job. I definitely learned a lot. It was not the job for me. I was there, I don't know, a year and a half, just under 2 years. And I learned a lot in that job of what I cared about in a job.
Mm,
And that included, we had short cubicle walls and kind of a more open space. And I loved that. I learned that I care a lot about who I work with. I am a pretty social person. And so I loved talking with my coworkers. Sometimes a coworker and I would have to go to Ohio to go check out some natural gas distribution there. And we'd both get in the truck and drive for hours upon hours of time. And I actually loved it. I loved being able to talk with my coworkers and hear more about their lives. And I didn't realize that that was something that you might look for in a job
yeah.
until that point. I really loved my boss. He was a great manager. He managed really well for me, where he gave me space to try and fail
Mm,
and also was like supportive of me even when I was failing to then kind of pick myself back up and try again. And I think that was so important at my first engineering job to be able to get that kind of experience and have a boss like that. I think I wouldn't have done well with a job that was really with a boss that was very micromanaging.
yeah.
It just wouldn't have worked out well.
For
Because I
sure.
can be kind of a independent person. So, yeah, I'm grateful for that job and also understand that it wasn't me. I learned that I care a lot about what the job is doing, not just my work in it, because I
Hmm.
did enjoy my work. I liked design. I liked environmental inspection even. But I cared who my clients were, and I cared what the larger picture of things that we were doing. And
Hmm.
so for me, working in that setting didn't work as well because I often wasn't interacting with the clients. Even if I knew who the client would be a large organization like DTE. And so
Okay.
it was harder for me to get behind the designs and really care deeply
Hmm.
because of that.
Got it. I can understand that. So then you've gotten this first job, you've kind of figured out some of your likes and your dislikes, what you do and you don't want. How did you go about optimizing the things that you did like and the things that you didn't like for your next role?
Yeah, great question. I don't know how, but definitely did optimize those things. I
Mm-hmm.
started looking at other jobs, and at first I was like, I don't even need to be an engineer anymore. I was like, I'm
Mm.
done with this. I'm done with being an engineer. I applied to be a youth pastor, which I mean would have been great, just wasn't my path. And then I would just randomly scroll LinkedIn or Indeed, like open jobs. And my next job, I ended up getting a position with the conservation district that then made me working for the National Resource Conservation Society. And it really did start to, as you said, optimize those things that I loved about the job. You know, I remember like Calvin didn't have agricultural engineering. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know what NRCS was. I had never heard of it, right? And so it was like this new experience of looking into a job that I didn't even know existed. And
Mm.
then as I started talking to the individuals, even in the interview, it was crazy to think like that can be a job. Like that's an engineering job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at NRCS, you often are working with a private landowner because the National Resource Conservation Service works on private lands. So you're working with private landowners that want to do environmental improvements to their land. And you work with them from start to finish. So you're going out to their land, you're talking with them about the challenges that they're experiencing. You have like the district conservationist who's been working with them that might suggest a couple of technical practices to do. You, as an individual, are going to go out with your survey rod and survey the space. And then you're going to take that information and you're going to take it to your office and you're going to upload it and you're going to, you know, look through CAD. You might have to do a watershed map in which you pop over to the USGS office and see if you can find their topographic maps of the area
Mm.
you're in. You're going to design it and then send it out to bid. And then if it gets approved, you're going to prepare the construction documents. And then you're going to meet with the contractors that the landowner hires. And you're going to talk them through what's expected. And then you're going to be there for inspection as well, of construction inspection. And so it was so cool because, again, as an engineer, to see something that I got to be a part of the entire process from start to
Mm-hmm.
finish, right?
Yeah.
And see the impact of it and know what the impact's going to be in that landowner's life was just, yeah, I mean, it was invigorating, right? I didn't even realize how much I didn't enjoy my previous work until I was doing that work. And I
Yeah.
was like,
Uh-huh.
this is awesome. I get to, you know, talk with landowners as a part of my job. Like, that's crazy. Sometimes they'd bring you cookies. I don't know. It was great.
That's nice.
And then my coworkers, we were a really small group, and it did expand a little bit more through my time there. But my coworkers, there's 4 of them that to this day are some of my best friends. And I still like will go up to Grand Rapids and hang out with them. I went to one's lake house the other day, a couple months back. And so for me, that is, again, really important that I'm connected to the people that I'm working with. And I don't think this is a thing for everyone. My spouse works remotely and he loves being by himself and working remotely. He's also an engineer, right? But as they say, different strokes for different folks. For
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm
Mm-hmm.
the type of engineer that wants to be with people, wants to see the impact of that. And so upon that, I started learning, like, again, what things I loved about a job. And so I learned that I loved being able to be a part of the whole of a job, that I loved a bit more of the designing and problem solving, because that existed much more when working for the conservation district than working in industry.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes in industry, people kind of already know what they want, especially in natural gas distribution. There's not a lot of room to play, I would say.
Sure. Yeah.
And in NRCS, I got to do that more. I got to problem solve more. And I think that that's something that I learned that I really love. I love the problem solving, the challenge of it, of like not sure what exactly works.
It seems like in this role, you really did it all, right? You were saying you did it from start to finish all the way through. You obviously at some point you learned how to do all those steps, but what were some things that you learned generally from having ownership of that whole process? What was some value that you got from having to learn how to do all these things and really taking control of the whole thing?
Yeah, I think one of the keys is like, again, what often makes a good engineer and a good designer is how much
Mhm.
you can see and understand the context, the larger aspects of what's happening. And I think right
Mhm.
now, with the way that we often use standards in the US, engineers so quickly as they're starting a project already have the standard outcome like prescribed, right? And so I think like that was really powerful that, even if I didn't get to see it, being able to work and shadow those that had been working in it a lot longer than I, my boss Chris, or there were two other engineers, Aaron and Juanita, that had been there a lot longer. And then one other engineer, Lexi, who had been there a shorter time. And it worked out quite well for me in the fact that I could get kind of the long view
Mhm.
from those that had been there for 20, 30 years. And then I could then turn to Lexi and be like, okay, so now, like, what does that look like today? Right? Because those
Mhm.
that had been there for 20, 30 years didn't even necessarily want to use CAD, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, I could use CAD. Like, I know how to use CAD, but they're going to be able to point things out that I wouldn't have known, right? I'm working on a composting facility, and my boss might say, Did you ask the landowner how big his skid steer is? Be like, no, why would I need to do that? And he's like, well, because that will determine if he can stack it to 4 feet or if he can stack it to 5 feet, and which would be like best for his practice, right? And so it was this process of learning all of these things to optimizing the design, of fitting the design into how landowners were already, often farming their land. That I'm I'm doing a grassed waterway across the land. Well, Juanita might point out, how can we get this to minimize the size of the grassed waterway so that we're still dealing with the erosion, so we don't have erosion, but also so that we're not impacting the farmer and taking, every foot lost of their land is money lost, right? And so if you have a really large grassed waterway, they're going to lose a lot of money. And so starting to think about those other aspects, right? The context of it all, seeing in person, working with contractors is the best and most frustrating and most humbling and like a combination of best and worst that exists,
Mhm.
in my opinion. I mean, contractors they're so knowledgeable and they're also so cocky. This is obviously an over exaggeration. Not every contractor is like this. But
Mhm.
to know when to stand up to a contractor, right, and argue about like a cement ratio versus when to be like, oh, you know more than me. Like, I may
Mhm.
be the designer, but like, that this isn't even realistic to build.
Mhm.
It was a really valuable experience, right? Seeing how
Yeah.
to actually like twist rebar or tie rebar together and things like that. Then when you're going to design, you start considering these things. And so then it
Mhm.
changes how your construction documents look. It changes how you do the design in general. And so I do think it's a really powerful thing to be able to be a part of the whole process.
Yeah.
You start seeing what matters in a process. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um I did really love it. So
I can tell by the way you're talking about it. It almost makes me wonder, to be honest. I'm like, man, why are you still not working? Not to, of course, I'm not into
no, that's
career
fair.
shaming here, but it does make me wonder because, you're talking about this so passionately, which is really, really incredible to hear, honestly. That's one of my favorite things about doing this is that I get to hear things like this. It's really enjoyable for me personally. But yeah, it seems I can see how what you're saying, it's just being able to understand and empathize a lot more with different stakeholders really helps you become better at what you're doing, whether or not you're an engineer. Just being able to understand the process, understand where that affects different things, leads to
Yeah.
you becoming really good at what you do. Because also, as well, I am so early, it doesn't even feel right to say that I've started my career as an engineer at this point, but I can tell just from the people that I've spoken to and what I've seen at this point that that is how you become a good engineer. And I can, from talking with other people, know that that's how you can become really good at really anything as well. Past guests
Mm.
on the show have also backed this idea. So that's really, really exciting just for me as well to see this very specific part of how a really specific
Yeah.
example of exactly what you're doing and how you become really good at it. So
Yeah.
that's really
And it's
exciting for me.
interesting what you said about, yeah, it's kind of crazy how much I love that job and that I'm not in it. Because I think that this also, to me, when thinking about career and career trajectory, like I do
Mhm.
think I could have stayed at that job and been really happy. And that doesn't mean that what I'm doing now is like a mistake, right?
Of course.
I think that for some reason, at least for me, growing up in like high school, I would have thought that there's like a perfect job out there. There's like my calling.
Hmm.
This is what I'm
Hmm.
supposed to be doing. And I just don't think that's true anymore. I think that there's a lot of things that I could do that I would enjoy my life during. And there's not one special thing out there that I could be doing, but instead it's kind of the decisions along the way of, yeah, how do I optimize what I want to do? How am I enjoying the period of time I'm in now? And knowing that it could change, it could not change. And either way, it'll probably be okay is really helpful for me to think about at this current, very unknown stage of my career
Hmm.
trajectory.
Yeah. That's really awesome. Thank you. That also as well. Pretty much like everything you've been saying, that's wisdom that can be very easily extrapolated to a lot of people's lives. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that and your views.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let's transition then. So you've now left the perfect job that you never should have left, but you're getting your PhD. You're getting your PhD now. I want to know what led you to decide to get your PhD. You've been in the industry for a little bit.
Yeah, great question. And we have two people to blame for that. The first is Kendra Zeman, and the second is Ann Perry Whitmer. But, I had kind of thought about like maybe getting a master's or something like that. But really, just because I found this job that, again, I didn't know existed. And I thought back to my undergraduate experience, and I felt so often that I was not the right type of engineer, that I didn't, care about the correct things, or again, like compared to my spouse, that I was too social for being an engineer, or things like that. And I realized once getting this job and working it that my perception of what an engineer was so limited.
Hmm.
And so part of it was me just wanting to tell more people that there's other options out there, right? That what we're exposed to is just so little, so small amount of engineering that exists. Again, I'm a first generation college student, so the idea of like going back to school after I had accomplished and gotten the college degree was a little strange. Um, you know, I think my family would attest to this day that when I was like, I'm being offered a federal position, but also I might go do this completely unknown thing, they were like, well, that is a decision. That is, kind of thing. I mean, they've been great, but yeah, I definitely know that they kind of looked at me strange. But to get back to it, I was in a field one day with my new coworker, Kendra Zeman, who had moved to Michigan after getting her master's in agricultural engineering from the University of Illinois. And we were just talking about what we cared about, and our lives and our approaches to engineering as one of the things that I, have talked about is important to me. And so we were in a field surveying, chatting about what was important. And I was talking about how frustrated I get with engineers when they or we design something and then people don't adopt it and we blame the people, right?
Hmm.
especially when it comes to infrastructure systems. I was talking about a bit of my international experience and just talking about how, engineers would be so much quicker to say, well, they need to be educated more. They just don't understand the system, right? And almost like blame it on them being like less of a person. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is the point in time when engineers give ourselves way too much credit, right? To think that
Mm-hmm.
engineering is something spectacular, that it's so spectacular that other people couldn't understand. People who aren't engineers couldn't understand, how amazing
Mm-hmm.
the engineering design is, right? And I was like, that's not on the people. That's a bad design. If you
Mm-hmm.
design it in a way that people can't use it or that they need extensive training to use it, like that's a bad design. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking with Kendra about this and she goes, I know someone you should talk to. So she introduced me to Dr. Whitmer, who is my now advisor. And we just had a virtual chat of talking about these things, talking about life, talking about experiences, the frustrations we had around engineers blaming systems on the people, and the want of engineering to be different, to be accessible. I talked about my work at NRCS, and I talked about how much I wished that I had gotten more of it in undergrad. I did get some of it, but really only through my international experiences, I
Mm-hmm.
would say. And somehow, through the end of our conversations, she was like, so you're coming down here, right? And I was like, I guess I am. Like, I don't know when it happened. I don't know how it happened. And then I was like, okay, tell you what. Yeah, I'll come down there, but I'm only getting a master's. I'm only
Mm-hmm.
doing a master's. Like a PhD, no one needs a PhD. No engineer needs a PhD. And she's like, yeah, that's fine. That's understandable. But if you come in as a doctoral student, I can fund you. And so, you can come in and just try it out. If you don't like it, you can always master out. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's real. And now 5 years later, here I am getting my doctorate, right? It was never my
Mm-hmm.
plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a little wild at the two, but I just got so excited by the idea that engineering could be different
Yeah.
that I think with my job at NRCS, I found that place. And then this idea that then I could influence engineering as a discipline, that
Mm.
I could help other people, other undergraduates, see the different types of engineering existed was just so exciting. Plus, then I could get transition into doing more water work. I was doing some at NRCS, but that I could focus more on doing water work and especially international water work. So those two things, and as my spouse will tell you, I'm a sucker for a possibility, for like a
Mm-hmm.
dream of what something could be. And so I think just the excitement of what this could be was so much that I was like, I was in. And there have been times that I've maybe not fully regretted it, but definitely questioned myself. And then
Mm-hmm.
other times where I've been like, yeah, this was a good decision. And, I think just because I question myself and have a hard time doesn't mean that it was a wrong decision, right?
Yeah,
It
of
just
course.
is.
There you go. I like that. It just is. So then tell me about what you've been doing for the last 5 years then.
Yeah, that's a great question. What have I been doing? So I work infrastructure systems, engineering infrastructure systems, and I focus a lot on kind of two aspects, but specifically around interpersonal power dynamics in design. So I've done some work around how engineers understand ourselves and how to kind of get a better understanding of ourselves in order to design better. So making our biases more plain, making the unknowns that we're doing more plain, right? So sometimes we might have this idea that things like numbers are completely objective, right? That they are the true. I don't think that's true, right? A number is still just an approximation for something. And so in feminist theories, they have these things called like situated knowledge. And the idea of situated knowledge is that we can't say that this one thing is true for all of time. But what we can do is we can describe the context, we can describe the situation, and then that thing can be true for that situation. And so it's not about making engineering, maybe it is a little bit less objective, but it's making plain or clear the aspects behind the assumptions, right? It's like a
Hmm.
stating the assumptions of
Okay.
any problem that you might do. It's just some of the assumptions include like my worldview. I, as a designer and an engineer, approach a problem in a specific way. And so if someone's trying to approach a similar problem, they would need to know how I'm approaching the problem in order to understand what might be similar and what might be different, right? And so I've worked a bit on that. I wrote a paper with Dr. Whitmer and Dr. Lindgren around teaching positionality to engineers, which is all about that. That's one of my favorite things to do. It actually came out of a teaching exercise in which I've had students design bathrooms, and I love that. I mean, I've really fallen in love with teaching as a big part of it. The bathroom exercise is an excellent example because I love when engineers discover these aspects, discover that
Hmm.
life is much more gray than we thought it was. And I love being able to be there in the moments of their discovery and be a part of their discovery. And so the bathroom exercise is really fun because I have everyone design a public restroom. And even though we've all used public restrooms and we are all humans,
Hmm.
everyone's restrooms are different, right? Because everyone prioritizes different things because people have different values and different experiences, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's been like the more like teaching side and the more engineering focused. And then for the community side, I mentioned the John Perkins Fellowship, and that really introduced me to asset-based community development and community development in this way that really affirms the power and the agency of local individuals. And so through this, I kind of started wondering how we can apply those same principles to engineering design. A big aspect in contextual engineering under Dr. Whitmer is local place-based knowledge, or a thing she refers to as innovative self-sufficiency. So how people are, in ways, engineers already in their everyday
Hmm.
life. And so how do we maximize, like tap into that, optimize that, and show them, affirm that they can can be engineers in other places too, right? Again, like engineering's not that special.
Yeah.
So that's my other side. So I've been working with a community in Honduras and an organization called Humanity and Hope International. And we've been working on how to do this through infrastructure design. So what the engineer learns through participatory methods such as asset mapping, such as, semi-structured interviews, storytelling with communities, as well as what is of affirming the local agency of a community member when it comes to something like designing an infrastructure system. So a lot of the plays of power, and then how we understand these social theories to help us engineers when we're trying to apply these things. Because they've been doing this a lot longer than us.
Hmm.
And so really tapping into the strengths that different social theories have.
Very, very nice. I have a question that I acknowledge is a little bit loaded, but earlier you mentioned that you don't feel like you're the right kind of engineer. Do you feel
Hmm.
like you've become the right kind of engineer for you?
Think my idea of engineering has expanded.
Okay. Of
I think so in short answer, yes and no. I think I can always grow.
course.
And I'm consistently humbled by the places and the areas I get to be a part of the engineering. Because it is a really humbling experience to go to a community and to interact with them and know that, peoples are looking to you for assistance in something as fundamental as water, right? And I don't think I'll ever feel good enough for that. And I think
Okay.
that's okay.
Okay.
I don't want to ever feel like I have it all figured out because I
Mm-hmm.
think at that point, my hubris would probably be so bad that I would make 1,001 mistakes
Uh-huh.
if I feel like I know it all and I know how to do it all. But I think my understanding of what an engineer is and what an engineer does has expanded enough that I now see myself as an engineer, and it's important to me that people see me as an engineer because I think especially at a place like Illinois where things are really focused on, or things can seem really focused on things like big data and stuff like that, that it's important to know that there are also engineers that aren't like that. And that is just as much engineering as the other things.
Yeah. That is really incredible of a sentence, to be honest with you. And that's part of the reason why I'm the biggest fan of your work and Dr. Whitmer's work. Shout out Dr. Whitmer, past guest on the show. I had to.
Yeah.
But because it's really remarkable stuff, and I think you guys do really incredible things. And that really
Well,
interests me and
thanks.
excites me. Yeah.
You know, institutions will also I think we're slowly getting there, but hopefully there's a place that will agree with you and give me a job.
Well, you know what? Honestly, on that next vein, I do wonder. So, actually, first question: when are you slated to when you graduate?
Yeah, so the current plan is
Mm-hmm.
to walk in May
Okay.
of
Okay.
2026.
Got it. All right. So, what are you thinking then? What do you want your next steps to look like?
Well, I think that in itself is a loaded question.
Of course, and I acknowledge that.
I think there is my dreams, and I have a lot of dreams. So I was really greatly influenced by Dr. Wonder, shout out to him, in undergrad, and the starting of the Clean Water Institute. I really loved my undergrad experience. And so I would really love a place that I could do research and teach and maybe start something like the Clean Water Institute, a place where I can do research and work with communities, that I can have real collaborations with communities in a way that also I can bring students along and kind of expose them to that. That's the dream. That's the hope.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hopefully in a place that there's some type of job security and my spouse and my dog can live with me. That would be, that's and if I'm close to some family, that would also be great, right?
Of course.
And
Yeah.
part of the reason that is so, I don't know, like, well, if this happens, why it's so much of a shady dream, I don't know if that's the right term, is because I look at my life and look at how many changes there have been and how many times I was so sure that this is what I should do and it changed, right? Even getting married was an aspect of that. I was working in Jordan up to 2 weeks before my wedding. Just if I've learned anything, it's that I actually don't know what things will look like. And I instead kind of take on this personality, or this way to view the world as open, excited, right? I want to be open to opportunities. I don't want to be so closed-minded as to what I think an engineer is, as to what I think my career path looks like, that I miss something beautiful, that I
Yeah.
miss something that, I could have enjoyed and I could thrive in. And so while I would love to go into academia, it's a rough time for academia. Maybe that won't work out. Maybe I'll get
Mm-hmm.
there eventually. Maybe I won't. It'll probably look different than anything I have in mind. And that's okay, right? I'd rather welcome it with open arms and get excited about the possibilities of what could be than begrudgingly trudge along and upset
Yeah.
at what is happening. So, yeah, that's a long answer to your question of what does next steps look like, I have zero idea. And it's weird because I feel like I have very little control over it. I mean, I have as
Mhm.
much control as applying and just putting myself out there. So, yeah, it'll work out. I hope.
Oh, 100%. It feels almost impossible for somebody who has such a really well-grounded idea of what their field looks like and what
Mm.
their values are for it to not work out for them. And if you're
Yeah, and
having
it's
this
all based
conversation
off
a
of
year,
like, well, and it's all based off of like what is our definition of a timeline and stuff like that. Like
of course.
what it all working out looks like in a year versus,
Mhm.
2 years. Again, right? Like I finished undergrad without a job when partially because I worked in Jordan over the summer, so I extended my work because I had to be a student in order to do that. And so the month of September 2017, it did not seem like life was working out. Was spending every day, I'd walk to the local coffee shop and get myself a little treat as a reward for applying to 10, 20 more jobs. And then I'd walk back and like those were my days, right? But now I look back and that was such a blip and
Mhm.
and such a small time that it's crazy to think of what I was thinking then of this isn't working out.
Yeah. That's a really lovely way to put it in perspective, I think. That's that's very, very nice. It's been really enjoyable talking with you. Do you have any last things that you want to share, whether that be piece of advice, things you want to promote, anything like that?
I probably should promote the fact that I need a job.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this conversation, want to talk to me more. I'm also, if you don't have a job, but you want to talk to me more, I love relationships. I mean, as I've mentioned, so much of my life, I've just been privileged by people letting me in and letting me see aspects of their life. I love talking to people. I love building relationships with people. And so, if this resonates with anyone and anyone wants to talk about their journey or what engineering can look like for them, um, yeah, hit me up. My email is EmilyJL3.
And I will put that in the show notes as well, if that's okay with you, of
Yeah,
course.
go ahead.
I guess you did just share it. It would be kind of weird if you were like, nope, no, thank you. They must listen
They
until
must
the
listen
1
and
hour,
write
1
it
minute, and
down.
28-second mark until that and write it down. So,
Yeah.
okay. But anyways, well, all right. Thank you so much, Emily. This has been a really fun conversation. I hope you have a
Yeah,
wonderful
that's
rest of
been
your
so
day.
great. Actually, can I say one
Mm-hmm.
more thing?
Of course.
Okay.
No,
You can
no, you
figure
cannot.
out where to
Please.
put this or thing. I do just want to shout out on that realm. Just like how many people, engineers or not engineers, have just taken a moment to really pour into my life.
Mm,
And I think that being open to people pouring in and learning from other people has really shaped me to who I am. And there's been connections that have happened years to decades later, whether it's someone I grew up with at the Ethiopian church, being able to connect with them, or last year, my spouse and I went and visited an old professor in Hungary, and he was the director of our service learning center. And I learned so much from him around servant leadership. I was able to take social science classes, and I loved being a part of the International Development Studies program at Calvin, which is unfortunately cut, is no longer there. But the amount of times that people have looked at this overly enthusiastic, completely unqualified, woman before them and said like, yeah, you can come along, had changed my life. And so I really just want to shout out them and thank everyone that's done that for me, because whether it was a moment or a larger period, it's been very influential.
what a way to end it off. Very, very nice.
And thank
Thank you.
you. Thanks so much for coming on. This has been really fun to like reminisce and think about, yeah,
I'm really,
my career
I'm
path.
really glad you enjoyed it. I also had a blast. So that's perfect. Thank you very much for coming on. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any thoughts, feedback, guest recommendations, or just want to say hi, shoot me an email at nick@reroutedpod.com. If you like the show, leave a review, give us a follow, or subscribe. In addition to Emily's email address, you can find links to our website and socials in the description below. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week.